to talk about climate change. I know there is a lot going on, but believe it or not, the pandemic we're living in, it's all very much connected. And US President Joe Biden has signed a series of executive orders designed to address climate change, including a new ban on some energy drilling, saying we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. So what does this mean for the fight against climate change? And what do we need to do here in Ireland? Well, joining me now is Cara Ostenberg, who's presenter of a new podcast, Down to Earth, on Newstalk. She's been a regular voice on the station and now has her own podcast, which is fantastic. And she's also a fellow in environmental policy in UCD. Hello, Cara.
Hello, Claire. Thanks for having me.
So how significant is what happened in the States with Joe Biden saying, do you know what, I believe in climate change and I'm going to make some changes?
Well, it's been an extremely significant week. I mean, the first day in office, he re-established that they are going back into the Paris Climate Agreement. He put climate change front and center with Special Envoy John Kerry, made it part of the National Security Council. And I guess even more significant when you compare it to the previous administration, where former President Trump rolled back on over 70 environmental regulations, withdrew from Paris, really tried to obstruct any action on climate change. So this is a complete turnaround from that policy.
And a lot of people, when they hear of climate change, they sort of say it's too late, and people will think the damage that's been done by the Trump administration, it'll be too hard to mop up. But is that true?
No, it's not true at all. I mean, it's never too late. Every degree, every bit of emissions that we reduce is an improvement and keeps us safer from the impacts of climate change long term. But I think the interesting thing is that even in the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, solar and wind energy in America continued to grow. So despite all of his efforts to promote coal and fossil fuels, he was unsuccessful, and America has been doing relatively well in addressing climate change given the situation they were in.
I know, because it's interesting. We were talking in the reception earlier, and you said we should change the conversation a little bit about climate change, because nobody wants to talk about it, particularly at the minute. We're under a huge amount of stress with the pandemic and the restrictions we're living under, and how they seem to be just firing out ahead into the future. So we feel like we've enough on our plate, just us as individuals. Certainly, I think it's different for leaders, or should be different for leaders. But you said something that I think is really interesting, that we should start talking more about the solutions, and that there are solutions out there. They just need to be put into action, because when we start with the problem, that's when we get the switch off.
Yeah, we do. We have compassion collapse and we dig our heads in the sand, and then we don't listen to the solutions. But we are so lucky to live in a time where all of the solutions exist. I mean, solar panels and wind energy and electric vehicles and electrified buses, they're all there now. So it's just a matter of implementing them and making the decision. And what I loved actually yesterday about Joe Biden's announcement was he started his speech by saying it's climate day here at the White House, which means it's jobs day here at the White House. And he's very much linking climate action to creating new, well-paid jobs in America. For example, he's committed now to electrify the entire U.S. government vehicle fleet. That's over 645,000 vehicles. And he's saying those will be replaced by electric vehicles made in the USA. So there are tons of jobs there for people to make new electric vehicles and in an American market, which is really exciting, and that's just one example of what's possible.
Okay, amazing. So we're further polishing up the halos on the top of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So what about here in Ireland? Where are we at with climate change?
Well, we've had a lot more ambition in recent years. I think the current government's commitment to reduce emissions by 7% a year is in line with what we need to be doing to meet our obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement. But still, it is a lot of talk, a lot of plans, and not enough action. So last year, we did see a tiny reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but it was mostly due to the weather, because we had a relatively mild winter. And, that's not really how you want to design policy. You want emissions to go down because we've enacted a policy that gets them to change. And to date, we just really haven't been responding fast enough in our actions to reduce emissions enough.
What about the effect the pandemic is having on climate change globally? Because I've even thought it myself. I mean, we're not using keep cups anymore, understandably, so that's more disposable cups. The disposable masks. Is all that balanced out by the fact that more planes are grounded at the moment or not?
We are seeing a drop in emissions because of the pandemic, and that's largely because of transport. You know, people are flying a lot less, and we're not taking our fossil fuel cars and to work anymore. So it's been relatively positive with respect to emissions reductions, all temporary. I mean, again, we don't want emissions to have to reduce by curtailing the economy to the extent that we have. We want to be able to grow the economy at the same time. But also, too, we've seen other things, like, for example, we're all in our homes now working from home, and we have very energy inefficient houses here in Ireland, so we're burning a lot of fossil fuel. That's way less efficient than if we were all going into an office for the day, where it might be a more modern building and there'd be more people, so it'd be a more efficient use of heat. So we probably will see some increase in emissions from things like solid fuels, from burning in houses, and we're certainly seeing that at a localized level. We're seeing a deterioration in air quality from the burning of solid fuels in people's homes.
What about the temperature of the planet? Has that gone down over the last year at all?
No, every year is the hottest year on record. It's kind of becoming old news. So the situation is we've now raised the temperature, overall average temperature of the Earth by 1 degree since pre-industrial times. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said we need to keep it below 1.5 or no more than 2 degrees of warming. We are headed toward about 4 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and that really is catastrophic for the way that we live today. So that takes a huge toll on civilization. And I like the way Biden in his speech yesterday was saying, you know, he's planning on spending $2 trillion on his climate plan, which is expected to reduce the Earth's temperature by 0.1 degrees, which is, you know, a tenth of a degree, which is certainly something. And he said, look, we're already spending billions on storms. Irma and Harvey costs America nearly $300 billion in damages. So, you know, we're spending that money on repairing damage. Why not spend it on actually acting on climate change and trying to prevent the damage from happening in the first place and creating jobs at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like common sense. When you look at the facts of what's ahead, it is like a horror story. I myself and my husband tried to watch the why does his name escape me now? The Netflix documentary with David Attenborough. And we had to stop. I just thought maybe right now is not the right time. We'll come back to it. And I'm reading a book at the minute by Sarah Wilson, This One Wild Precious Life. And she literally lays out the facts of what's ahead. And the way we're living now with the restrictions, with a complete change to how we're living, is going to be more frequent if we continue down the road that we are on. So much as we don't want to look down this road, we really have to. So what should we be doing on an individual basis? Because I think a lot of us feel helpless, like there's just not really much that we can do. But is there?
Yeah, I think in Ireland in particular, we're very privileged that we have pretty good access to our politicians. I mean, growing up in America, I couldn't call my congressman or senator and get them to meet me or, you know, have Zoom with me or anything. But here in Ireland, your local TDs really do feel an obligation to respond to your inquiries. So that's a huge opportunity for us to influence policy. And we've seen in the last couple of elections that climate change was one of the top 5 issues on the doorsteps. Every candidate was saying this from every party. So even raising that issue to your candidates or to your elected officials tells them that this is an important issue for their constituents. And once they know it's an important issue, they tend to start considering it in their policy decisions. So that's always, to me, the number one thing I think we can do.
And what are you saying to them? Not we want climate change to be fixed. What specific things can you request?
Well, you know, it's even enough to say climate change is my burning issue. It's the thing I'm losing sleep over. It's the number one issue. I think even just planting that seed. I know as someone who ran in local election once upon a time in Shankill-Killiney, at the time, homelessness was the big issue on the doorsteps. And so it just got me thinking. And then when I saw articles on homelessness, I started reading them more because I knew it was important to the constituents that I was trying to get votes from. So, you know, I think that in itself, you don't necessarily have to have all the answers, but even saying this issue is really important to me, it's really important to my family, even asking them what they're doing about it is certainly something that has tremendous impact. And we've seen it have tremendous impact. The Green Party wouldn't be in government right now if it weren't for people raising that issue on the doorsteps.
And are changes being made? Like, I often think it, and I wonder if I'm thinking it unfairly. I see the Green Party cycling around on their bikes, and it all looks great. But is anything actually happening? And they're the ones with the real power to make it happen. Why isn't it happening?
I think since the Green Party have gone into government now, we've seen a huge increase in spending on things related to climate action. So 80% increase this year in how much money is going to deep energy retrofit, and a lot of that is going into social housing and deprived communities. So we will start to see a lot of deep energy retrofit in the next couple of years as a result of that pressure, and that'll have so many knock-up benefits. It means warmer homes, it gets people out of fuel poverty, it improves air quality, and it has an impact on climate change. So, and we are also seeing this with transport. I mean, I know in my area of Bray, I'm seeing a lot more cycle paths being constructed now. So it'll take a while for them to have an impact, but I do feel they will have a long legacy as a result of the things that they're implementing at the moment.
What about the small individual things, turning off the lights you're not using, taking things off standby, not buying coffee in a takeaway cup? And I know we want to support the small businesses at the minute, but just deciding that that's a no for you. Do those things add up? Do they make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, definitely every little helps, and I would encourage, if we're going to be putting pressure on our government to do things around climate change, we also have to get our own house in order as much as we can, and it's hard when our energy system is still so dominated by fossil fuels, but we can, and I always measure my carbon footprint every year and get a sense of where my carbon is coming from. It used to be flying. Over half my carbon footprint used to be flying because I was going home to America and I was working in Brussels, and I made an active decision to cut down my flying significantly, and as a first step, then we look at things like, can we improve our energy consumption in our house by turning off the lights or insulating or whatever it is we can afford, and we look at our diet. So I say the first thing you should do is measure your carbon footprint and then look at what's practical for you to start chipping away at that carbon footprint. We can't change everything overnight, but we can certainly start improving the situation.
There's a report due from Youth Work Ireland today to be published by former President Mary Robinson. What information is held within this?
Well, they were looking at really the climate and environmental justice element of this. And this is a problem around the world where disadvantaged communities tend to be disproportionately affected by environmental issues and climate issues. It was an issue. I grew up in New Orleans, and the big fossil fuel burning power plants were always built next to poor communities, and then they were suffering from air quality issues and water quality issues as a result. And it's a problem everywhere, including Ireland. And the report mentions that 70% of our our incinerators and landfills in Ireland are built next to disadvantaged communities. So there's an inequality there that we need to address. And it was really nice to see Mary Robinson was quoted as advocating for system change. I mean, she spent a lot of time giving wonderful examples around the world of individuals that are trying to enact individual change in their lives and in their communities. But it's really good to see her saying, yes, we also need to change the systems at a bigger scale to address these injustices.
Yeah, so there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of positivity. So I do think in these instances we don't need to be frozen by fear and just turn our heads off. And I think knowledge is power. And you have a brilliant new podcast here on the station. So this is where people can educate themselves a little bit. So tell us a bit about it. You're on episode 2 now.
Yeah, Down to Earth was a slot that I did on the Hard Shoulder for about 2.5 years. And, it was only 10 minutes and we couldn't really get into the meat of a subject. And there's so many kind of nuances around environmental issues. So we've now moved it to a podcast series, and it's on air on Newstalk at 8 p.m. on Saturday nights. And it allows us to really get into the meat of an issue. So the first episode was on air pollution. This next one is on energy. And we have people like Minister Eamon Ryan coming in to talk to us about our clean energy vision for Ireland and what Ireland could look like in the future if we move to a fully fossil fuel free and renewable electricity system.
Well, I will be listening. I have clicked subscribe already on my podcasts. Thank you very much. Presenter of Down to Earth on Newstalk and fellow in environmental policy at UCD, Cara Ostenberg. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Claire.